I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold when my phone buzzed. It was Facebook, a notification I almost ignored. I don't use it much anymore. Just a few friends from my old engineering firm, some family photos, the kind of digital ghost town older people keep out of habit. But something about the name on the screen made my stomach twist. Friend request from Emily Dawson. For a second, I thought I'd misread it. Emily Dawson. My daughter. My little girl. The one we buried in the summer of 1987. My thumb froze above the screen. I hadn't seen that name in years, not written like that. Not outside of a headstone or a folded newspaper clipping I kept in my dresser drawer. I opened the profile. The cover photo was a sunset over water, somewhere coastal. The profile picture showed a woman, maybe mid to late 40s, brown hair streaked with gray. But the eyes stopped me cold. Green with gold flecks Emily's eyes. My daughter's eyes. I felt the air go out of me. It had to be a scam. Someone found her obituary online and decided to play a cruel joke. People do things like that, I've learned. They see grief as something to exploit. But there was only one post on the account, dated yesterday. "Hi, Dad." That was it. No emojis, no explanation. Just those two words. My hands started to shake so badly, I had to put the phone down. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Outside, the maple tree in the yard moved in the wind, its branches tapping lightly against the window like someone knocking. I told myself it wasn't real. It couldn't be. Emily had drowned in the river that summer. I'd identified her myself, but as I sat there staring at that screen, those eyes staring back at me, something deep inside me, the part of a parent that never stops listening for their child's voice, whispered that maybe, just maybe, it was her. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up in my recliner, the phone glowing in my hand, refreshing the profile over and over. The account had only been created a week ago. No photos, except the profile picture. Location listed as Victoria, BC. That's nearly 900 kilometers from here. The account had one friend, a man named Dr. Samuel Price. No mutuals, no history. Just a professional-looking profile with the banner image of a medical building. My mind spun in circles, trying to make sense of it. I clicked through Emily's page again. The birth date wasn't listed, but the timeline began with a single post. "Hi, Dad." Then silence. No comments, no likes. I stared at that message until the words started to blur. My cursor hovered over the chat icon. I typed, "Who is this?" For a few seconds, nothing. Then the typing bubble appeared. 3 dots pulsing on the screen. My heart slammed against my ribs. Then the reply came, "You know who I am." I sat back, breath catching in my throat. My first thought was that someone had hacked the account. Maybe a cruel impersonation. But then another message came. "You buried someone else." I read it 3 times before it sank in. The light from the phone reflected off the framed photo of Emily on the mantel, the one from her 10th birthday, chocolate frosting on her chin. I'd kept that photo there for nearly 4 decades. I swallowed hard and typed back, "If this is a joke, it isn't funny." No response. Just that silent profile staring back at me. I checked the About section. Again, created exactly 7 days ago. One friend, one post, no other details. I clicked on Dr. Price's page, but it was locked. His photo showed a man in his 50s, wearing a white coat, smiling politely at the camera. A doctor. Maybe real, maybe not. I felt a creeping sense of dread settle in my chest, the kind that comes before a storm. I turned off the phone, but it didn't help, because somewhere in the dark, behind the silence of that account, I felt it the impossible hope that my daughter might still be alive. It was July 1987, the kind of summer that bakes the sidewalks and makes the air hum with cicadas. Emily had gone to her friend Lisa's house, 3 blocks over, to trade stickers and ride bikes. She was 10. She wore her favorite blue sundress, the one with little white daisies on it. I remember telling her to be home by 6 for dinner. She smiled, said, "Okay, Daddy," and rode off down the street, the tassels on her handlebars fluttering in the sun. That was the last time I saw her alive. When she didn't come home by 7, Karen started to panic. I told her to stay calm, that maybe Emily lost track of time. By 8, we were driving every street in town, calling her name out the car window. By 10, the police were involved. I still remember the look on the officer's face when he asked for a recent photo. The next 3 days were a blur of search parties, news vans, and sleepless nights. I helped comb the woods by the river with a flashlight until my legs gave out. On the morning of the 3rd day, they found her. A jogger spotted something tangled in the reeds near the riverbank. I knew before they said a word. They told us she must have slipped on the rocks, hit her head, and drowned. Accidental death. Case closed. I identified her at the morgue. Her face was pale and swollen, her hair matted with mud, but I swore it was her. I told myself it was her. The funeral was small, closed casket. Karen cried until she fainted. After that, she stopped speaking much at all. 5 years later, the silence between us became unbearable. She moved to Vancouver. I stayed in the house because I couldn't bear to leave the last place Emily had laughed. I kept her room exactly as it was, posters on the wall, stuffed animals on the bed, the faint smell of her strawberry shampoo still lingering. Sometimes, at night, I'd stand in the doorway and imagine I could hear her humming. That's the kind of madness grief breeds, the kind that makes ghosts real. The next morning, the phone buzzed again. I knew before I looked what it would be. The same name. The same impossible weight behind it. Another Facebook message. This time, it wasn't just text. The message read, "You buried someone else." My fingers went numb. Attached was a photo. It was a picture of a newspaper clipping an article from the Kelowna Daily Courier, dated the 14th of July, 1987. The headline, "Local girl, 10, laid to rest after tragic accident." The photo showed Karen and me standing beside Emily's coffin. Across the article, someone had scrawled a single word in thick red ink. Mistake. My hands shook so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. I felt that same cold dread from the night before crawl up my spine. I tried to steady myself, to think rationally, but reason had no place here. I opened the message thread again, typed, "Who are you?" No reply. I called Karen. It had been almost a decade since we'd spoken. Divorce papers, distant birthdays, awkward silence. She answered on the second ring, her voice small and cautious. "Michael?" I didn't even know where to start. "Have you been on Facebook today?" I asked. There was a pause, then a sharp inhale. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You got it too." She explained that she'd just checked her notifications after my call. The same friend request. The same name. The same face. I could hear her voice trembling through the phone. "This isn't possible," she said. "Emily's gone." I wanted to believe that. God. I did. But the way the photo had been marked, the precision of it, the handwriting that looked disturbingly familiar, it all felt personal. "Maybe someone's trying to tell us something," I said quietly. Karen started to cry then, soft and helpless, the sound of 38 years of buried grief cracking open. "What if we were wrong, Michael?" she asked. I had no answer. Because for the first time since 1987, I wasn't sure anymore. By morning, I'd convinced myself to take the message to the police. Logic demanded it. Emotionally, I already knew they'd think I was losing it. But I went anyway. The officer at the front desk listened politely while I explained about the Facebook account, the messages, and the photograph of the newspaper clipping with the word mistake written across it. When I mentioned Emily's name, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or pity. He disappeared into a back office for a few minutes and returned with a detective in his 40s who looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Mr. Dawson," he said. "What you're describing sounds like a case of online impersonation or identity theft. Old obituaries are public record. Scammers use them all the time." I wanted to believe him, but my gut twisted at his tone, calm, procedural, detached. "You don't understand," I said. "There was only one post." "Hi, Dad." "Who would know to say that?" He sighed. "We can file a cyber report, but honestly, these things rarely go anywhere. Probably someone overseas running a scam." He handed me a brochure about online safety, like I was an old man tricked by phishing emails. I was halfway to the door when another officer, younger, maybe in his 30s, stopped me. "Sir," he said quietly, glancing toward the detective. "Off the record. I remember hearing something about your daughter's case when I was a cadet. The coroner back then, Keller, I think he retired early. Word was, he had a few irregular cases before he left." "Irregular how?" I asked. The officer shrugged, clearly uncomfortable. "Misidentifications, paperwork issues, nothing proven. He lives up at Ridgeview now, the nursing home on the east side." He hesitated before adding, "If it were me, I'd start there." I thanked him and left, the brochure crumpled in my pocket. Ridgeview was only an hour's drive. I sat in my car outside the station for a long time before starting the engine, staring at the reflection of my own tired face in the windshield. If this was all a cruel joke, I needed to end it. But if it wasn't, if Keller had made a mistake 38 years ago, then Emily's death might have been the biggest lie of my life. Ridgeview smelled like antiseptic and wilted flowers. The kind of place where time slows to a crawl and everyone speaks in hushed tones. I signed the visitor sheet, gave the receptionist a story about being an old acquaintance, and she pointed me toward room 214. Dr. Leonard Keller was 91 now, thin as a shadow. He sat by the window in a wheelchair. Sunlight pooling around him like it was holding him together. His eyes were pale blue, almost translucent, but sharp. "Dr. Keller," I said softly. "My name is Michael Dawson. My daughter, Emily." He blinked once, twice, and then his expression changed. "The little girl by the river," he murmured. His voice was frail, but the words landed like a hammer. "Yes," I said. "I need to ask you about her." He looked back toward the window for a long moment. "I knew this day would come." He gestured for me to sit. "That case," he began, "was one of several that still keep me awake, even with the medication." His hands trembled slightly as he spoke. The body we received was badly decomposed. Water damage. Animal activity. The police were under enormous pressure. There'd been 2 other missing children that year. The public was in a panic. People were calling it the abduction summer. They wanted closure. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. "You weren't sure it was her, were you?" Keller shook his head slowly. "The dental records didn't match perfectly, but the sheriff insisted we call it a positive ID. Said the family needed peace. The town needed reassurance. So I signed the report." "You signed off, knowing it might not be her." His eyes filled with something that looked like guilt. "I told myself it was close enough. that it didn't matter anymore. But it did. It always did. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. If that wasn't your daughter, Mr. Dawson, then someone wanted you to think it was. The room went silent except for the rhythmic hiss of an oxygen machine. I felt the floor tilt beneath me, reality bending just slightly. Who? I managed to ask. Keller looked down at his trembling hands. That, he said, is the question I've been afraid to answer for 38 years. Karen called me that night. Her voice was shaky, brittle, like she'd been crying for hours. I went through the old boxes, she said. The ones from the house. I hadn't asked her to. We hadn't spoken much since the message from Emily's account. And part of me wanted to leave it buried, literally and figuratively. But there was something in her tone that made my stomach tighten. You need to see this. She came by the next morning, a cardboard box in her arms, edges worn soft with age. Inside were photographs, newspaper clippings, and birthday cards. I recognized most of it remnants of a life we'd tried to preserve through grief, but then she handed me a smaller envelope, yellowed, unmarked. This came a year after the funeral, she said. You don't remember because I never told you I kept it. She opened it carefully, like it might explode. Inside was a Polaroid. The moment I saw it, my breath caught. It showed a young girl sitting on a motel bed, her knees pulled to her chest, eyes wide and glassy with fear. The wallpaper behind her was faded green, the kind you only see in places that smell like cigarettes and mold. She looked about 11, maybe 12, just old enough to be Emily if she had lived. The photo had been creased down the middle, like someone had folded it in half in a hurry. Karen flipped it over. On the back, written in shaky black ink, were 3 words. Don't look for her. My throat went dry. You showed me this, I said numbly. No, she whispered. I showed you the envelope. You threw it away before you looked inside. Said it was sick. Said people were cruel. But something told me to keep it. She pressed the photo into my hand, and I felt the faint texture of the ink beneath my thumb. The handwriting, she said. Doesn't it look familiar? I stared at the jagged letters, uneven and slanted to the right. It did. It looked like mine. I didn't say that out loud. I just sat there at the kitchen table, the photo between us, while the past cracked open like a wound that had never really healed. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the name on Emily's Facebook friend list. Dr. Samuel Price. I'd ignored it before, assuming it was a fake profile. But now, it felt like the only thread I had left to pull. I searched his name online. The results showed a neurologist based in Victoria, British Columbia, founder of something called the Price Institute for Trauma Recovery and Cognitive Rehabilitation. The website looked legitimate enough. A soft blue background, a photo of a man in his 50s with kind eyes and silver hair. Underneath, a motto, restoring what memory forgets. My skin prickled. I called the number listed on the site. After 3 rings, a woman answered. Price Institute. How may I help you? Her voice was calm, practiced. Yes, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm trying to reach Dr. Samuel Price. There was a pause, faint keyboard clacking on the other end. I'm sorry, sir. There's no one here by that name. I frowned. But this is his clinic. Another pause. I'm not sure where you got that information, she said evenly. But Dr. Price hasn't worked here in years. Before I could ask more, the line went dead. I tried calling again. The number rang once, then went straight to voicemail. Generic, robotic. I hung up. By then, it was past midnight. I opened my laptop, went back to the site, refreshed the page. Error 404. The entire website was gone, like it had never existed. I checked Emily's Facebook again. Her account still there. Still empty. Except for that one post. The friend list had changed. Price's profile was gone. Deleted. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking in the search bar. Whoever had created that account didn't just want to reach me. They wanted to erase every trail leading back to them. And somewhere out there, in Victoria or beyond, someone knew exactly what happened to my daughter. Once the name Dr. Price vanished from the internet, I knew I couldn't sit still anymore. Logic told me to stop, that I was chasing ghosts, but reason had stopped governing my life the moment Emily's name reappeared on that screen. So, at dawn, I packed a bag, filled the tank, and started driving west. 9 hours from Kelowna to Victoria. The kind of drive that forces you to sit with your own thoughts until they start to sound like voices. The mountains rolled past, the sky bruised with clouds. Every mile felt heavier, like I was being pulled towards something inevitable. I reached the ferry terminal by late afternoon, crossed to the island, and booked the cheapest motel I could find near downtown. A squat, 2-story building that smelled faintly of mildew and old coffee. The clerk didn't even look up when I signed in. Room 7. Thin walls, flickering light. A single bed that creaked when I sat on it. I opened my laptop and started searching. Missing persons databases. Hospital archives. Public records. Hours blurred into each other. I found nothing at first, just dead ends and old news articles that still quoted my name under grieving father. But around 2 in the morning, buried deep in an old medical record index, I found it. Unidentified female. Admitted 2001. Victoria Psychiatric Rehabilitation Center. Approximate age: 24 to 26. Memory loss. Trauma. Related dissociation. Distinguishing mark: healed laceration on left wrist. My pulse spiked. Emily had a scar on her left wrist from when she fell off her bike at 712 stitches. A white line she used to call her lightning bolt. The Jane Doe record didn't list a discharge date. Only a note. Transferred to community housing, 2008. No name, no follow-up. I stared at that line for a long time. Transferred where? To who? I printed the report at a 24-hour copy shop down the street, the clerk barely glancing at me as the paper slid from the machine. I folded it into my jacket pocket and stepped outside. The air smelled of salt and rain, the streets slick under the streetlights. Somewhere in this city, a woman with my daughter's scar had lived. And maybe, just maybe, still did. The next morning, I started knocking on doors. Old care homes, shelters, transitional housing centers. Most people were polite, some irritated, but none recognized Emily's picture. By the 5th place, my hope was fraying. The building was an old church, converted into a women's housing facility. The sign out front, reading Haven Outreach Center. I showed the front desk worker the photo of Emily at 10 years old, freckles, gap-toothed smile, hair in 2 braids. The woman behind the counter froze. Her eyes flicked from the picture to me, and then back again. "Where did you get this?" she asked softly. "She's my daughter," I said. Or she was. Her lips pressed together. "She used to stay here." My heart stumbled in my chest. "When?" "Couple years ago." Name was Emma, I think. Quiet. Kept to herself. Always wore long sleeves, even in summer. She hesitated. "She left about 3 months ago. Went with a man she called Doctor. Said he was helping her remember who she was." I felt the room tilt slightly. "Do you know his name?" "No. But he drove an old silver Volvo. Came by every few weeks. Looked professional. Not the type we usually see around here." She bit her lip. He seemed to really care about her. She motioned for me to follow her down a narrow hallway, lined with numbered doors. She stopped at room 12. This was hers. The door creaked as she opened it. The room was small, bare except for a bed, a dresser, and a nightstand. Dust hung in the sunlight, filtering through the blinds. On the nightstand sat a single photograph in a cheap frame. I stepped closer. It was a picture of a little girl sitting cross-legged on a front porch, a blue bike leaning against the railing behind her. Emily. Age 10. The same photo that hung on my wall for decades. I traced the edge of the frame with my thumb, my throat tight. The staff worker looked at me, eyes wide. "Whoever she was," she whispered, "she never stopped missing you." Convincing the police to reopen a case that's been closed for nearly 4 decades isn't easy. The detective assigned to missing persons in Victoria listened to my story with the kind of polite skepticism reserved for conspiracy theorists. But when I showed him the coroner's confession and the medical report for the 2001 Jane Doe, something in his expression shifted. He agreed to make some calls. Within a week, I was sitting in a sterile room at the RCMP office, filling out paperwork to authorize new DNA testing on the remains buried under my daughter's name. The detective said it might take weeks, maybe months, but I didn't care. For the first time since 1987, there was a chance at truth. They exhumed the remains quietly. No media, no announcement. I wasn't allowed to be there, but the thought of it haunted me anyway. The coffin lifted from the ground, the soil falling away like old secrets being unearthed. I went back to my motel and waited, watching the rain streak down the window in crooked lines. I barely slept. I kept my laptop open on the table, the Facebook tab always there, waiting for something new. 3 nights after the exhumation, it came. 2:14 a.m. The same account. Emily Dawson. A new message. Stop digging. It's not safe. That was all. My chest went cold. I stared at the screen, my reflection warped in the glass. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Who are you?" I typed. The message was read instantly, but there was no reply. I checked the profile again. No friends, no posts, no Dr. Price. Just that same photo. The same eyes. I could feel something watching me from behind that image. I called the detective first thing in the morning. He told me to stay put, that they'd trace the IP if they could. But I knew how this worked. Whoever was behind it had covered their tracks. I closed the laptop, sat back in the creaking chair, and realized I was terrified for the first time. Not of what I'd find, but of who didn't want me to find it. It was a journalist who finally connected the dots. Her name was Laura Kemp, an investigative reporter for a small independent outlet in Vancouver. She'd written a piece a few years back about experimental therapy programs that skirted legality in the 90 seconds. I reached out to her, sent what I knew about Dr. Samuel Price. She called me 2 days later. Voice low and steady, the way reporters sound when they know something big is coming. "Michael," she said. "I've heard that name before." Over the next hour, she told me everything. In the mid-1990 seconds, Dr. Price had been a neurologist specializing in trauma and dissociative disorders. Officially, he ran a private clinic offering memory reconstruction therapy for victims of abuse. Unofficially, his methods crossed every ethical line imaginable: induced hypnosis, prolonged isolation, experimental drug therapy, identity rebuilding. He believed that by rewriting traumatic memories, he could give people new lives, clean slates. Several of his patients were unidentified. Women pulled from shelters or hospitals. Jane Does. Many had been reported missing years earlier, but their families never found them. When authorities started asking questions, Price vanished. No charges were ever filed. His license was quietly revoked. Laura sent me copies of old court documents, sealed depositions, even a medical journal article from 1996, quoting Price under a pseudonym. He called his process cognitive restructuring for reintegrative healing. It sounded clinical, almost noble. Until you saw the names in the case, files women between 20 and 35, rescued from trafficking or domestic abuse, stripped of their pasts in the name of recovery. Do you think he found Emily? I asked. Laura hesitated. I think he found someone he could turn into her, she said softly. Your daughter's disappearance fits his pattern. The trauma, the loss, the opportunity. If she survived that river, someone might have taken her in. And Price, he would have seen her as the perfect subject. Her words hung heavy in the air. The idea that Emily hadn't just lived but been rewritten was almost worse than losing her. If she was out there, she wasn't the girl who'd left on her bike that July afternoon. She was someone else entirely. Someone who might not even remember being my daughter. The call came on a Thursday morning, just after sunrise. I'd been awake for hours, sitting at the motel desk with the curtains drawn, the hum of the mini-fridge filling the silence. When my phone finally rang, I almost didn't answer. The number was blocked, but I knew it would be the detective. Mr. Dawson, he said, his voice steady, but heavy. We got the results. I held my breath. The remains buried under your daughter's name. They're not a genetic match. For a second, everything went. Still the sound, the air, even my heartbeat. Not her, I whispered. No, he said. Whoever that child was, she wasn't Emily Dawson. He said they were reopening the case, reclassifying the death as an unidentified juvenile. Promised updates, formal paperwork, follow-up calls. I barely heard him. All I could think was that the little girl I'd buried 38 years ago was a stranger. And the one I'd mourned, the one I'd seen in dreams and photographs, might still be somewhere in the world. I hung up and sat in silence until the shadows in the room shifted with the light. When I finally opened my laptop, my hands were shaking. The Facebook account was there again. A new message. You found me. Please, stop looking. I'm safe now. My breath caught. I typed, "Where are you? Can I see you?" The message was read instantly, but there was no reply. A minute later, the profile photo disappeared, replaced by a blank gray silhouette. Then the name vanished. Account deleted. Just like that, she was gone again. I stared at the empty screen, the words, "You found me," echoing in my mind. I didn't know if I felt relief or devastation. All I knew was that the truth had rewritten everything I thought I knew about my life. The grave in Kelowna no longer held my daughter. It held a lie, one that had kept her hidden for nearly 4 decades. A week later, a plain white envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address. No stamp markings. Just my name, written in neat, careful handwriting. I almost threw it away, thinking it was junk or another cruel trick. But something about the lettering made me pause. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single photograph. A woman stood on a rocky shoreline, wind pulling at her hair. The ocean behind her stretched gray and endless. She was older, maybe late 40s, with streaks of silver along her temples. But her eyes, those unmistakable green eyes, were the same ones that had once looked up at me from a 10-year-old's face. On the back of the photograph, 5 words written in blue ink. "Thank you for letting me live." My knees nearly gave out. I called Karen immediately. When she arrived, I handed her the photo. She stared at it for a long time, her breath catching in her throat. "Oh, Michael," she whispered. She turned the picture over, tracing the words with her fingertip. Her expression changed, softening into something fragile and certain. "It's her handwriting," she said. "I'd know it anywhere." We sat there at the kitchen table, the same place we'd once argued, cried, and grieved, the photograph between us. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Outside, the afternoon light spilled across the table, catching the edge of the picture. Emily, by the ocean, alive, distant, free. I didn't know where she was or what her life had become. But maybe that didn't matter anymore. Maybe some ghosts don't need to be found to be at peace. Karen reached across the table and took my hand. "She's alive," she said quietly. That's enough. And for the first time in 38 years, I believed her. The cemetery was quiet that morning. The kind of silence that feels deliberate, like the world was holding its breath. Mist drifted through the trees, softening the headstones into gray silhouettes. I hadn't been here in years, not since the day we lowered that coffin into the ground. Back then, I believed I was saying goodbye to my daughter. Now, I knew I'd been saying goodbye to a stranger. I walked the familiar path to the grave, the flowers in my hand trembling slightly from the chill. The stone was the same as I remembered, simple, weathered, carved with a lie. Emily Dawson, 1977, 1987, beloved daughter, forever in our hearts. I knelt down, brushed the moss from the engraving, and placed the flowers against the base. White lilies, her favorite. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "For both of you." The words caught in my throat. I looked at that name, the one I'd clung to for decades, and felt the weight of everything I didn't know. "Whoever you were," I whispered, "you mattered too." The wind stirred, carrying the faint scent of rain and earth. It felt like someone was listening. A week later, I had the stone changed. The new inscription was simple but honest, for Emily and for the girl we never knew. When the stonemason finished, I stood there for a long time, running my fingers over the new letters. It felt right, truthful, like a wound finally closed. That night, back home, I sat at the kitchen table again, the same spot where the first message had appeared. My laptop sat open, the Facebook login screen waiting. I told myself not to look, not to reopen the wound, but I did anyway. Emily's account was gone. Deleted. Erased. Just an empty search bar where her name used to be. I sat back, exhaled, and closed the lid. But then my phone buzzed a notification from Facebook. My heart stuttered. It wasn't a message, not a friend request. Just a memory. A photo from 1987. Emily and me in the backyard. Her on her bike, me holding the seat steady while she laughed. Memory shared, you and Emily, 1987. I stared at it for a long time, a smile tugging at the edge of my mouth. Maybe some ghosts don't haunt to scare us. Maybe they just want to be remembered. I whispered goodnight, closed my eyes, and let the past finally rest. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.